Hi everyone, so this is the last video on rearranging equations or changing the subject of equations that involve two steps. So this is the last lesson on these two-step questions. Now in these examples we're going to be making R the subject of these equations here. So I'm going to switch to the visualizer so that we can work on these. So similar to last lesson where we were dealing with indices, these questions are really similar. These examples are really similar to each other, except the root, so here it's a square root and here it's a cube root, they are kind of going over different things. So here we have the root going over R, and then the plus 6 is outside of the root, and here the plus 6 is inside of the root. So these two things, even though these questions look very similar, they lead to different answers. So we'll look at the first four examples. We want to make R the subject in each of these different equations. So if I look at the first one, R is over here. Now R has been square rooted and then 6 is added on. So the square root happened first and then the 6 was added on. And we are going to undo that and work backwards. So we're going to undo the plus 6 first. We're going to do the inverse of that. So to undo that, I'm going to subtract 6 from both sides. So that will leave me with t subtract 6 on the left hand side and just the square root of r on the right hand side, because plus 6 minus 6 or add 6, subtract 6, cancel each other out. Then I'm nearly there. I want to make r the subject, but at the moment r is being square rooted. So to undo the square root, I do the inverse. I square it. Now the square and the square root are inverses of each other, so I get r, they cancel each other out. And because I've had to do that to the right hand side, I have to do it to the left hand side. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I need to square the other side as well. Now I'm not just going to put squared here, because that's just squaring the 6. And I don't want to just square the 6. I need to square everything on the left hand side. So I'm actually going to move my equal sign out of the way as well. I need to square everything on this side, and I show that with brackets. So r is equal to t take away 6 all squared. And that's my answer, because I've made r the subject. R is by itself over here and is the subject of this equation. In the next one, I've got the square root of r subtract 6. So again, we want to make r the subject. Now r is being square rooted and then 6 is being taken away in that order. So we're going to work backwards. I'm going to sort out the take away 6. To undo subtract 6, I add 6 to both sides. So I'm going to get t plus 6 equals the square root of r. And now I'm in a very similar position to the previous question. I want the r by itself, but at the moment it's being square rooted, so I have to do the inverse, which is to square it. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other, but I'm not just going to square the 6. I need to square everything on that side. So my answer is t plus 6 all squared equals r. I know I'm finished because I have successfully made r the subject of this equation. Next I can see that I've got t equals, now r is in a square root, but it's now being multiplied by 6. So r is being square rooted and then this is multiplied by 6. I'm going to work backwards. I'm going to sort out the multiply by 6 first, and I do that by dividing both sides by 6. So what I get is, well, on the left hand side I've got t divided by 6, and on the right hand side, well, the 6 and divide by 6 cancel each other out, and I just get the square root of r. Now I want the r by itself, and at the moment it's being square rooted, so I'm going to square it. But whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Now I'm not just going to put squared here, because that means that only t is being squared. I need to square everything on that side, and again I'll use brackets. So I need to square everything. on that side. So in my next line of working out, well, the square root of r all squared, well, they cancel each other out to give me just r. And then I have t over 6 all squared on the left-hand side. And I have successfully made r the subject of this equation. Now what I can do is I can actually square the numerator and square the denominator separately to give me a slightly different answer, t squared over 36. So if I square the numerator and square the denominator, that's absolutely fine. So I can have two different answers here. And this last example on this row, I've got t equals the square root of r all divided by 6. So here, I want to make r the subject, and it's first being square rooted and then being divided by 6. So I need to undo those things and to work backwards. So I'm going to undo divide by 6 first by multiplying by 6 on both sides. So on the left-hand side, this will give me 6t. And on the right-hand side, well, divide by 6 and multiply by 6 cancel, and I get the square root of r. I'm very close to my answer. I want r by itself, so I have to square the square root of r to get r by itself. And that means whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other, so I have to square both sides. But remember, I want to square everything on this side. So I put brackets in to square everything on that side. So we end up with r equals all of 6t squared, or we can square the 6 and square the t and give ourselves 36t squared equals r as an alternative answer. But both of these are fine. We have 4 more examples that we're going to look at. And in the next examples, the roots are going over the whole lot. So everything that's happening, the root is over the whole thing. So we'll see what type of answers we get here. So in this first one, I can see that I've got t equals the cube root of r plus 6. All of r plus 6 is being cube rooted. And I want to make r the subject. So I think to myself, okay, well, what has happened to r? Well, first, r had 6 added to it, and then all of that was square rooted. So first it was add 6, and then cube root. So we're going to work backwards. So that means I sort out the cube root and then the plus 6. Now to undo cube root, I cube. Whatever I do to one side though, I must do to the other side as well. So what I get on the left hand side is t cubed. And on the right hand side, well, the cube. So I've cubed both sides because I want to undo the cube root here. So that means I have t cubed on the left hand side and r plus 6 on the right hand side. Then to get r by itself, I'm simply going to subtract 6 from both sides. To get t cubed, subtract 6 equals r. And that means I have made r the subject of this equation. Next, I want to make r the subject. Now r has 6 subtracted from it first, and then everything is being cube rooted, and we know that it's that way round because the cube root is over everything, so that must have happened last. So first the 6 was subtracted, then we have the cube root. So we first have to undo the cube root by cubing both sides. So that gives us t cubed equals r subtract 6. Then, to get this r by itself, we simply have to add 6 to both sides to give us t cubed plus 6 equals r. And we have successfully made r the subject of that equation. Now over here, again, the cube root is over everything, so we know that happened last. So r is being multiplied by 6, and then everything is cube rooted. So we undo the cube root first by cubing both sides, which is t cubed equals 6r, because the cube root and the cube cancel each other out. Then to get r by itself, we divide by 6 on both sides to give us t cubed over 6 on the left hand side equals, well, 6 and divide by 6 will cancel, so that gives us just r. So we've made r the subject of that equation. And this last equation, we can see that the root again is over everything. So that means it happened last. So, well, what happened first? Well, first r was divided by 6, and then everything was cube rooted. So first we divided by 6, then cube rooted. So we work backwards. We undo the cube root first by cubing both sides. So this gives us t cubed equals, well, cube root and cube cancel each other out to give r over 6. Then, to get the r by itself, I'm going to multiply by 6 on both sides. So this gives me 6t cubed on the left-hand side, and then multiply by 6 and divide by 6 cancel each other out to give me just r. So there I've made r the subject of that equation. So now you're going to do some practice questions in your book and mark them to see how you've understood this. So, if you could pause the video and have a go at these 8 questions in your book. You're making D the subject of these equations, so pause the video now. Okay, so we're going to go through the answers, so make sure you've got a different colour pen and you're marking your work. So in the first one, we can see that D is being rooted and then E is added. So we work backwards, so we take away E from both sides, and then we square both sides. And we make sure we square everything on the left-hand side. Next, we can see that D is being square rooted and then E is subtracted. So we work backwards. We add E to both sides, and then we square both sides. Next, we can see that D is being rooted and then multiplied by E. So we work backwards. We're going to sort out or undo this multiply by E. So we're going to divide by E both sides first. Then we square both sides. Now we can write that as 4 divided by E all squared. Or we could write this as 16 over E squared. So there's 2 different ways you can write your final answer there. Next, we can see that D is being rooted and then divided by E. And we know that it happened in that order because this root isn't going over the whole thing. It's just over D, so actually that happened first. So we work backwards. We multiply by E both sides, and then we square both sides. And there's another way we can write this as well. We can square each thing inside the brackets to get 16E squared. The next row, we can see that D, we found the 4th root of D, then added 2. So working backwards, we subtract 2 both sides, and then we raise both sides to the power of 4. Next, we can see that D has the 4th root. So we found the 4th root of D, then divided by 2. So working backwards, we're going to times 2 both sides, and then we're going to raise both sides to the power of 4. Next, we have D is being cube rooted and then multiplied by 2. So we're going to divide, there's another way we can write this answer. So we can do 2 to the power of 4. So 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. Sorry about that. The next one, we're going to divide by 2 both sides first, and then we're going to cube both sides. And we can write that as E cubed over 8 alternatively. So these 2 answers here are both acceptable. Next, we can see D has, we've got the 5th root of D, then subtract 2. So we're going to work backwards, we're going to add 2 to both sides, and then we're going to raise both sides to the power of 5. Okay, here's 8 more questions to have a go in your book, so pause the video now and have a go at these. Okay, we're going to mark these now, so make sure you've got a different colour so you can mark your work and correct any mistakes that you made. So, in the first example, we can see that E has D added to it, then everything got square rooted. So we work backwards and we square both sides first. Now 4 squared, I'm going to write that as 16 because it is 16. And then to get the D by itself, I'm just going to subtract E from both sides. Next, D has E subtracted from it, then everything square rooted, so working backwards. squaring both sides, and then add e to both sides. Next, d is being multiplied by e, then everything square rooted. So we're going to work backwards and square both sides, then divide both sides by e. And the next one, we can see d is being divided by e, then everything square rooted. So we're going to work backwards and square both sides, and then multiply both sides by e to get the d by itself, to make d the subject. And the last four examples, or the last four practice questions, sorry, d has 2 added to it, then everything was cube rooted. So working backwards, we're going to undo the cube root by cubing both sides first. Then we're going to take away 2 from both sides to make d the subject. Next, we have d has 2 subtracted from it, then everything is cube rooted. So we're going to work backwards and cube both sides, and then add 2 to both sides to get our answer. Next, we can see d is being multiplied by 2, and then we found the 6th root. So we're going to raise both sides to the power of 6 to undo that. Then we're going to divide both sides by 2 to get the d by itself, to make d the subject. And the last example, we have d is being divided by 2, and then we found the 5th root. So working backwards, we're going to raise both sides to the power of 5, and then we're going to multiply both sides by 2. So those are your practice questions. Hopefully you've made lots of corrections, and you're going to work on section I of the sheet now.